future of the print media is closely tied to the future of civic life and transparent, free expression in Pakistan. If we don't see those connections very clearly, we're not going to be able to communicate with India. There's many things wrong with India and its communication process, don't get me wrong. But the basic right to live in dignity has not been questioned in as fundamental a way as it has in Pakistan over the last 10 years. So I think we need to distinguish between better evolutions along the way to a creation of a civic life where freedom of information and expression and association become important. I think that we are less developed than India in this matter, and I don't want to make any claims that we are better. But we're fighting. We continue to believe in a good future, and we think that responsibilities to transparency in our actions, to the commitment to the rights of our people, are closely tied in with the kind of battle the print media faces. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamid. We will take some questions from the floor, please. From the audience, rather. Ji, right at the back there. Zara please mic udhar.
Please introduce yourself, your name, the company that you represent, and please be a bit brief about your question. Do we have the mics? Yes, right there. The gentleman who's standing?
Oui. Thank you, Mr. Hamid Haroon, for enlightening us about the role of the print media. You also talked about access to information. My name is Mateen Haider, and I work for Dawn News Television. So you didn't tell us what is the solution. You talked about all problems, and you also talked about access to information. You talked about problems print media is facing. You talked about Zia era. You also spoke about Musharraf era. What is the future? What is the solution? Can you tell us 5, 6 major solutions to the problems which print media is facing, and particularly how relations between print media and the government authorities, maybe Ministry of Information, maybe overall government, how relation can be streamlined between press and the government? Thank you.
I'm sorry if I didn't make it clear, but I don't see the solution of government-press relations as being the only obstacle for the print media in the years that lie ahead. I think our fundamental obstacle lies in relation to civic development and communication and the freedom of expression in Pakistan. These are wider issues which are being debated every day on the streets of Karachi, Lahore, Quetta, Islamabad, Peshawar, and the response is being met with bombs, with killings, with militancy. What I'm saying is that the written word can exercise a source of reflection and a course of change over a longer period of time, but cannot, in its essence, offer short-term solutions so easily, particularly when the problem is one of governance. The problem of governance has to be linked with the fact that of the vast majority of our experience, we've lived under martial laws and army rule, and we haven't developed a system of civic governance which is cognizable as being efficient, competent, and acceptable to our ordinary citizen. It's difficult to talk about solutions without the solution of the larger problems. But I do think certainly that we have seen that laws with respect to freedom of expression and the right of expression are weak. Laws with respect to freedom of press have not always shown themselves to be sustainable in crisis. I think we need to review the body of law. We need also to establish higher standards. Part of what we see in the phenomenon of falling sales and perhaps shrinking markets for parts of the media is the result of falling quality. The situation with respect to solutions is not easy. You need to have some of the larger solutions before you come to the smaller ones. But certainly a greater sense of dynamism like you see across television needs to reintegrate itself back into press thinking, and that alone should begin to solve the problems. But the problems of modern newspaper, newsroom management, and the kind of fundings it requires in a shrinking 6 or 7 year deep recession are not always easy to work out. I think perhaps a little bit of patience is needed, and you're quite right. I'm very bad at providing solutions. That's why I'm not fighting for a berth in the caretaker government.
Thank you.
Yes,
We'll take a question there,
yes.
please.
One more question and then we'll
in
move
the
on to the
second
next
row.
section.
Is it on? Thank you. I'm Professor Hamid Ahmed Bhatti. I teach philosophy and psychology with special emphasis on philosophy, psychology, and ethics of media. I may look a rebel in this great audience, but I would say that I'm reading newspapers for the last 60 years, 60.
Sir, may I request you to please direct
I'm
your question?
coming to the question because sometimes philosophical. It may be better than...
Due to paucity
yeah,
of time,
please.
yes.
It may be philosophical. And I want to ask Mr. Hamid, a great name in the field of media, very learned person. Why don't you put emphasis on the most important aspect for the development of any country in the world, and that is higher education, science, technology, engineering, and research, innovation, development, and the modern sciences, all the modern sciences.
Okay. Sir, can we request you to please direct your question?
Yes. It's absolutely neglected. I haven't seen a single editorial asking the government or the governments of the provinces to establish a university or a science or a center of excellence.
So great, we've got it. So what his
Please,
question is basically,
question is,
what
please,
is...
the media has put a horse behind the cart.
Yes, thank you, sir. Would you like
Because,
to address that?
yeah, please, Mr. Hamid.
I think that it would be fair to say that media communication technologies in the print for many years have not been behind the rest of the world. And I wouldn't say they've been thoroughly cutting edge, but they've been very reasonable with respect to the models of development followed in other countries, some with vastly smaller, larger incomes than what Pakistan enjoys. I think that, yes, in the development of society, we should not confuse ourselves. In the development of society, science and technology play very key roles, and I think in the development of media, they are one factor. In a philosophical sense, they're certainly a major factor, but in a practical, pragmatic sense for mapping out the short-run and medium-term adjustments of policy and development, they may be less significant. I don't want to knock down what Professor Bhatti has been saying. I think that science and technology is important, but I really think the real battle for the future of the Pakistani media and for its audience is in the hearts and minds of its reading audience. And I think the technology of the mind in Pakistan and the limits of forbearance of that mind is something we need to explore equally along with the science and technology factor.
Thank you, Hamid. Because of the time shortage, we...
जी जरूर ऑफलाइन आप बात कर सकते हैं. We're moving on to the next session, which is जी जरूर आपको माइक दिया जाता है. आप क्वेश्चन क्रिस्पली आप अपना पूछ लें. जी जरूर बात करें.
लेकिन देखिए हमारे यहाँ तो सेंट्रलाइजेशन पॉलिसी ने मार दिया है सिवाय चंद बड़े अखबारात. उस पर मैं चाहता हूं कि आप थोड़ी गुफ्तगू करें ताकि जो लोग आए हुए हैं ये उसको सुन सकें और उन्हें मालूम हो कि आइंदा हमें कैसे जिंदा रहना.
Khushnoor, thank you for bringing this matter forward. वो कहते हैं कि sometimes those who are in the field of retirement are slow to respond to current issues because they think current issues will take care of themselves. Khushnoor is absolutely correct to say that facing the print media right now is a challenge that is central to the existence of the print media, which is the centralized media policy of the PID, the Press Information Department. What does this say? The centralized media policy says that government advertisers may decide which cities they want to communicate with, but which media will be chosen for that communication will be the decision of PID. Now, in the light of what I've told you earlier, such decisions therefore become very clearly the decisions with respect to which firms are to receive this in media. Roughly, as I pointed out to you earlier, anywhere from 50 to 60% of the non-published allocation list of PID, of the Press Information Department, goes to fake newspapers, sometimes owned by politicians, sometimes by their brothers and nephews, and sometimes by civil servants or NGOs acting in consortium. You've never heard of these papers. They assume dramatic importance with respect to allocations in the Press Information Department. And the authentic media is starved for allocation of these funds in advertising, and the false media, the dummies as we call them, receive the bulk of government revenue. One more form of government corruption that the Judicial Commission doesn't appear to want to investigate too carefully. Why cannot the Press Information Department publish the advertisement list? Why cannot it be open to transparent scrutiny? I would suggest that those people who believe this should be so should pass a resolution at the end of this conference, and that conference resolution should be given to the Press Information Department. It's important for the survival of media not to be battling shadows while the country and its civic institutions are in danger. I thank you, Khushnud, for bringing this to my attention, and I hope my omission is rectified by this.
Can I say something?
जी, please.
खुशनूर साहब ने जो पॉइंट उठाया वो बहुत वैलिड पॉइंट है, और हम बहुत अरसे से ये बात इंफॉर्मेशन मिनिस्ट्री से जब से ये सेंट्रलाइज्ड मीडिया पॉलिसी आई है वो उठा रहे हैं. ये सेंट्रलाइज्ड मीडिया पॉलिसी जो है 1964 में कैबिनेट ने इम्प्लीमेंट की थी, और फिर उसके बाद वो ख़त्म हो गई और अब दोबारा रिवाइव की गई है 2013 में. ये ऐसी बात है कि वो आपको याद है, मैं हमेशा कहता हूँ वो काले रंग का एक फ़ोन होता था सीमेंस का, उस फ़ोन को आज लाके हम अपने आईफोन्स के साथ और उसके साथ रिप्लेस करना शुरू कर दें. सो वी आर एक्चुअली गोइंग बैकवर्ड्स. I think the Press Information Department, the Ministry of Information, the government have to seriously consider, do they want to take the whole system into the past, or do they have a futuristic outlook and they want to take the system forward? This is something the government needs to decide immediately, because this is actually hurting the interests of the newspaper industry, particularly the smaller and the regional newspapers. This is something that they need to focus on. और ये बयानात दे दे के और अच्छा हम देख रहे हैं, अच्छा कुछ कर लेते हैं, ये कर लेते हैं, is neither here nor there. This has to be decided now, and I don't think there is any more room for हाँ बिल्कुल. And खुशबू साहब आपको और भी इसमें developments हैं, we will discuss them with you later on.
Thank you, Sarmad.
Thank you for that invigorating session. We're moving on to the next session, which is a special address. As you may be aware, that the theme for the summit is newspapers in the new media ecosystem, and we've drawn an analogy of newspapers with James Bond, considering that newspaper is really the Bond of all medias. And we've also titled our sessions on Bond movies. So the next session is titled The Spy Who Loved Me. And I'm going to invite on stage Mr. Krishna Prasad, the Editor-in-Chief of Outlook, to talk on the role of media in conflict resolution between India and Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Krishna Prasad, Editor-in-Chief, Outlook.
This is a subject that Mr. Javed Jabbar also touched on yesterday in his special address, and we hope that Mr. Krishna Prasad, Editor-in-Chief Outlook, will also talk about this in more detail and depth.
Good morning, everybody, and sorry for this very flurried-looking uh, entry into this auditorium, and sorry also for anything that might sound a little amiss because we're a little taken in by the speed of events in the last few minutes. As you know, Mr. Najam Sethi was supposed to be here but is not. So what I'm really going to do is speak for a few minutes, just 3 or 4 minutes, on what I see as an Indian magazine editor as a key issue in this whole process of conflict resolution, which really has become a bit of a cliche since it's been bandied about for so long. I speak, before anything else, I speak largely as an editor of a magazine which is a national news magazine, but I also speak as an Indian who's not really a Delhi guy, who's not really a Punjabi guy, but who's a real South Indian from the deepest part of South India. I come from a place called Mysore. Mysore is approximately about 3,000 kilometers from here. Mysore is as far as you can get from Wagah, as far as you can get from Punjab, and as far as you can get from Kashmir. The reason I mention this is because of this, which is, for very many years now, I have been quite troubled, really very, very troubled, both as an individual and as a journalist, by what has really been happening within the media, both print and electronic and digital now, of course, but print and electronic largely. And I've been really troubled by the extremely narrow contours in which this debate has been framed and is continuing to get framed over and over and over again, which really is something which baffles me as a South Indian. This is an issue which you might not relate to very, very quickly, and I beg your pardon for that. But for me, this is an issue very important simply because if you're talking of our two countries, if I am talking of our two countries, I think we need to involve large parts of both Pakistan and India. And as far as I can see, for very many years now, there's been a huge disconnect between the way this debate has been framed, the way this debate has been carried forward, and the way this debate seems to get stereotyped over and over in the media. I have for very many years, even before this Agra summit happened between General Pervez Musharraf and Mr. Vajpayee, I've been very baffled as to why we could never take this debate beyond the Great Triangle of Delhi, Agra, Jaipur. Why have we not been able to take it anywhere down south? Why have we never been able to, for example, have a summit of sorts, say, in this wonderful hill station like Murray called Ooty, which is in the deep south of this country? And I say all this with great amount of trepidation. I'm not trying to make a very serious case a very trivial one. I'm really saying this with great trepidation simply because I think we need to involve large parts of our country in this debate. If we really want to resolve this debate, if we really want the resolution that we are seeking, I think we need to involve large parts of the country. You need to get more people involved in this process. At this point of time, as we speak, sadly, as a Mysorean who now lives in Delhi, as we speak, even as we speak, it seems to be as if this debate is not going too forward in terms of geography. So that's point number one for me. And I have been baffled, and I really think this is something we must consider as we go forward. The second thing that is really striking me, and that strikes almost everybody across both sides of the border, is how much the media is really muddying the waters over the last few weeks and months and years. And this in particular is especially more clear and more well defined in the case of television, which you're not seeing too much of, fortunately, in this country. But what we are seeing back home, especially through television, is absolutely shocking jingoism of a kind and order and scale which is difficult to fathom. You really have started to wonder in this whole debate as to where journalism stops and where jingoism begins. And frankly, the lines got so blurred in the last few months and years, and really in this whole race for television ratings and so on, it has been quite rabid, it's really been shocking, and it's really been something to be very, very worried about as simple people on both sides of the border. That's point number two. But point number three, which is for me the key issue here, is what can we in the media do? And what can we in the media do is what the Dawn has been doing for so many years now, what the Jung has been trying to do with the Times of India group in many ways, and so on. But I think what is also really happening is that we have got sucked into a debate which is really narrow, quite trite, and quite stereotyped. Here's the final point I want to make. One of the things I have been baffled both as a journalist and as an editor now is how this whole debate, besides being limited by the geography of what we are talking about, has been limited by the kind of people who are articulating these thoughts. Both, I mean, especially for us as Indian journalists, it really baffles me that we have never ever been able to tap into the common man and woman of Pakistan. It just seems to be, if you look at our newspapers and magazines and TV stations, it just seems to be as if Pakistan is populated with people who are either in the army or in the ISI or just retired generals. It seems to be that we have just been unable to hear and feel and listen to the thoughts and voices and feelings of people like you and many others outside. You know, we are 23 of us Indians who have come on this trip for this South Asia Summit of the media. If you meet each one of us, we have wonderful stories to tell you about the wonderful people we've met so far. Raza Murad, the actor, was just telling me this morning that he ran out of battery on his cell phone. You know, his cell phone ran out of juice. And he asked a friend of his to really go and check and get this, cell phone repaired of his. Eventually, the cell phone is returned, and the cell phone he gets is an absolutely new one, because that battery which had been served up to him was really in no position to be retrieved. That's point number one. Point number two, you talk to Anant Goenka, who is one of the leading entrepreneurs from India. He says he has met the 4 best friends of his life in the last 3 days. 4 best friends in the last 3 days. Ask me. I have met on my plane trip to Karachi. I met a man, a young boy who was just 23 years, who's studying at the Islamabad University and doing a master's course in political science, and he's from Balochistan. Muzaffar Baluch was his name. Why am I telling you these stories? I'm telling you these stories because we in the Indian media have unable to take these voices across the border. I don't know how it works for you in your newspapers and on your TV stations. We have really been absolutely unsuccessful in carrying messages of these people, these thoughts, these aspirations, these ambitions, these drive, these desires, these whatever the feeling, the angst, the drive of these young people of Pakistan, of the ordinary people of Pakistan. We have really been unable to carry forward this. Yesterday morning, I went for a jog along Embassy Road. I think it's called Embassy Road, right? Embassy Road, I think. I went on Embassy Road for a long jog and had the most beautiful experience yesterday morning around 7:30. I was carrying my iPod. I stopped at a tea stall where a lot of young people who were driving water trucks were having chai. And we got chatting, and let me tell you with great pride, I made them listen to one of India's finest music composers, a man called Ilayaraja, who composes music in Tamil, who had sung a song in Kannada. What am I trying to say? I'm not trying to brag about our own personal experiences, and I'm sure all of us have our own personal experiences. What I'm trying to say is we in the Indian media have failed miserably in conveying these thoughts. We have failed miserably in telling the world and telling Indian readers and viewers that there are real people like us on the other side of the border who have the same problems, the same pleasures, the same pressures that drive them. We are unable to convey to the people of India that Pakistan is also a country populated by human beings. Each one of us here is a human being with our own little, flame burning inside us. It seems to be that we have really fallen into the trap on both sides of the border, especially I would say on our side of the border, in painting your country in a specific light. I think we have failed miserably in that. I think if you're looking at conflict resolution, if you're looking at resolving this debate, you could always argue, is this really such a huge issue? When you look around you, you're having this summit in a Pakistan-China Friendship Center. You look around, you see so little of India, so maybe we are all overstating the case from across the border. But the short point I want to make is that if you're looking at conflict resolution, if you're looking at taking this issue which has been festering for 65 years and frankly shows no sign of really getting resolved, if you're looking at taking this issue further forward, here are my 3 simple points, which is, please, let's look at geography. Let's get more Indians involved. Let's take it across from the little triangle of Delhi, Agra and Jaipur. Let's take it to different parts of India, 1. 2, let's be a little more tempered in the way we talk and speak. And let's show some balance and semblance of balance when we write what we write or we say what we say on television. And third and most importantly, I think if we are unable to convey to the people of India or to the people of Pakistan issues beyond killings on the line of control, issues beyond Kashmir, if we are unable to show that we are a nation of real people, I think we would have failed history big time. I think we need to show to the people of India that Pakistan faces the same issues as we do. Yes, there are other issues and we should get really bothered by them. But I think we fail as human beings, we fail as journalists, and we fail as media professionals if we are unable to take this issue forward and show this as an issue of people, of real human beings, of real issues who face the same problems, pressures and pleasures on both sides of the border. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Krishna. I guess you've resonated the sentiments of a lot of us here. And we also have amongst us Mr. Satish Jha. Request you to stay here. We also have amongst us Mr. Satish Jha, who has been an editor in both English and Hindi newspapers. He started the daily Jansatta for the Indian Express and was later the editor of Dinaman at the Times of India group. Now he's engaged in using technology for development and advises entrepreneurs, organizations and governments. We request Mr. Jha also to take this a little further from what Krishna has touched upon.
Mr. Satish Jha, please.
Thank you very much, and is it still good morning? It's a big privilege for me, and I thank Anurag Batra and Ishab for this opportunity. I first got invited some 25 years ago, and I haven't made it despite 6, 7 invitations I had. And when Krishna Prasad was talking about how he felt, I can tell you, I met my friends from Pakistan in the US as Hubert Humphrey Fellow. And I don't know anyone, 4 or 5 people who came to drop me at the airport, who embraced me and who had tears in their eyes, sending off me after the fellowship that I had. And they invited me to Pakistan. Today somebody is coming to see me. That's the kind of affection Pakistan has given to all of us individually. And I really appreciate some points that Krishna Prasad brought up. And in many, many ways, I look at things that we have to take a long-term view. When things don't work for 65 years, then we should stop and ask, should we keep doing the same things forever? Should we repeat the same mistakes? Or should we stop, pause, think, go for the diagnosis, understand what the root causes are, where we can make a beginning? I'll share with you the challenges of looking at society as a journalist. And I go back as a 16-year-old kid who began learning how newspapers are seen by people, how they shape our thinking, how they reshape our consciousness beyond the school, how seriously citizens take the newspapers, how they can bring us on the streets, how elections are fought and won, and what role newspapers played at that point in time. I go back to media when it was akhbar in the eyes of a common man. We did not know the word media at all. I did not know the word media at that time. Akhbar was all at that time. And I saw the kind of images we learned to grow up with. and they shape the way we think in the times to come. So when I went to Kashmir about 15 years ago, and I looked at television, I was totally shocked. I said, despite all the education I had, all the 5 colleges I went to in the US, and very liberal education, if I saw that television 10 times, I'll be a very different man. I'll react very differently. I could be a violent person. I could have growls that I never felt I had. So that's the kind of power of television that I saw in Kashmir from across the border. Now that was my point first, do we need this? Then I said, does India also do this? But I did not know what India did. Maybe they were all channelized in a certain way. Maybe they were not. I'm not privy to that. But the point being that the kind of emotions media can evoke, they're phenomenal. I haven't forgotten. I became editor at 26 years of age, ran Dinaman for about 3 years. It was a magazine which is very different from how Ravi runs it, because I increased the price of my magazine from 1 to 3 rupees and 5 rupees, and my circulation went to about 270%. So there was another time, I don't know what happened, don't ask me, because I did everything I did not know much about, but that's how the results were. But I learned one thing. I had a colleague who was the daughter of an admiral, and her husband was the son of a DG of health services. And he wanted to become an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, there were some laws and somewhere he got on the wrong side of law because of some inspector, and they issued a non-bailable warrant against him. For 1.5 years, no matter how many people they knew, the chief secretary, the chief minister, the government, nothing could be done. The guy was under duress. And one day, the Mrs. Admiral told me she was crying, and I said, what's happened? And she told me, this is what's happened. I said, let me see who is this person in the government. And I called the person. You'll be surprised. My 2 minutes conversation, all he told me, sir, you are the editor of the magazine that made me who I am. Anything you say, I will do for you. And he dismissed the case in just 1 day. That was the power of media. This is the consciousness that it creates. And these people, when they become leaders, decision makers, they carry those images in their minds. So I would say that the leadership of India, leadership of Pakistan, it's grown in a certain soil. That soil had a history. When I look at people who are my leaders in profession, Kuldeep Nayyar, Nihal Singh and others, they knew Pakistan better than any of us would ever know. They came from here. They had strong feelings, a strong relationship, and they were such champions of peace. Then we thought, when this generation passes away and the baton comes to those who were without that history, perhaps things will change again. But I don't know what has happened. The jingoism that Krishna talked about, when I see that, I feel disappointed too. What has happened in our conscience of newspapers or learning? And that's where I want to go back and talk about some possibilities here as a media person first, and then a larger issue of how do we make peace possible. Before I do that, I also want to recall something which happened when the Iraq war began under Bush. There was a CNN correspondent, he just made one small observation, and that observation was that I think the strategy is not right. Within 90 minutes, he was fired by CNN. Can you believe that? This is a nation that talked about freedom of the press. In 90 minutes, someone who just opposed very mildly as an individual who was being interviewed by another BBC, I thought. He just said, I forget the name now. He was fired. That is the kind of follow-up of foreign policy I've seen in the US, despite the free press. For domestic, they are free. For foreign, they are not. When it comes to matter of defense, you just cannot go out of the line. Same thing happens in most countries. And somewhere, we need to ask ourselves, if the question of struggling in our society, the number of questions that emerge in society, the kind of challenges we have, the violence we have, the nationalism in India, the kind of we saw a few days ago in Quetta, we deal with them in a certain way. We come to the streets, we fight them electorally, we translate that into politics. But when it's between two nations, it can't be done that way. Then forces end up moving. So we have to take that process seriously, and I would say one way to begin that process is we have an Institute of Mass Communication. It's a South Asian school. Lots of people come there, and wherever students of mass communication go, whichever countries, Africa and wherever, it changes the perspective people come with, they go back different people. So if, for instance, SAMS thought in terms of creating an institution where population was 50-50 from both countries, faculty was from both countries, and we caught them young, it will be a very different way of looking at life. And we continued to get them, those people who are in leadership, off and on, come and spend a month here and a month there. And two nations are so critical to each other's existence. I was surprised when I saw $45 billion the market cap of Pakistan compared to more than $1 trillion of India's. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be 4 or 5 times larger if the two countries came together, and more trade and more relationships they have, it'll be easier for us to come together. But from media's point of view, the fact that we can talk to each other more often, early on, that will be a huge step forward as such. I think in the end, it will depend on what kind of citizens we create. We have 95% illiteracy in India. I do not know the numbers in Pakistan, unlike they are very different. And for me, illiteracy is not the one who can't read letters or numbers. It is those who cannot connect the dots, who can't reason. Education should be about reason. Today, more than 65 years ago, we are in a position, without changing our budget, we can help every child become a citizen who can stand up to face the challenges of the 21st century. Because technology allows us, just like you have cell phone, 15 years back we couldn't think of giving communication tools to people. Today, just like cell phones did, today we can make it possible that every child grows up into an adult who can think, not just talk 1, 2, 3 and ABC. Both nations should think in terms of, in the next 20 years, there won't be a single person who can't reason in a reasonable way. If you did that, 65 years have been lost, but next 20 could change the destiny of our neighborhood and the two nations. So I would say, let's rethink how journalists actually think. Incidentally, I also must say, the very people who are talking or who are crossing the boundaries of journalism into jingoism in India, I can talk about that, they are not just innocent people. They are not illiterate people. They're very smart people. They also know the meaning of what they're doing. But ultimately what happens is our smartness is also shaped by the values we have, the fears we have. We should take away those fears, we should reshape the values. We shape the values, take away the fears, we will be different people, regardless of the smarts we have. So that is something we have to be careful about. And I think, say, India is full of about 100,000 journalists. I guess you will have, a few tens of thousands too. From them, the leaders, those who are going to emerge in the next 10, 15, 20 years, let's start working on them. Let's create institutions which bring every year 200 of them. Those who talk about, someone told me yesterday we have only one correspondent in Islamabad or Pakistan from India. That should change. And similarly, and vice versa. When that begins to happen, we understand each other better. I think we can handle a number of things by changing the perception of citizens, of decision makers, and the intelligentsia of the two countries. Media has a huge, huge role to play. If it can actually make us come to the streets, it can also help us go back to our homes. So let's look at the power of media in a positive way. In fact, I was introduced to Johan Galtung when I was 17 years old. He talked about journalism for peace, or peace journalism. Johan Galtung became major sociologist of the planet, did not make much of a difference, but the word of peace journalism stayed, except that it's not been effective. We have seen more casualties in the past 20 years, 25 years than in the 25 years before in the global environment, despite we haven't had a Vietnam. So in other words, there is something more important to be done in terms of education. Wherever we lack an ability to connect the dots, reason out things, we have a challenge. And media particularly shouldn't be just nation-bound. It should look at a larger issue of humanity. My goal at 15 years of age was that we should have a world without passports. I don't know if I'll see that in my lifetime, but many things I thought of, they've begun happening. I thought everybody should have telephone. That was much easier. But two neighbors without visa, that would be a dream I'd like to cherish. Thank you so much, but I think it's a great opportunity for SAMS to make this happen. Thank you.
So that was quite an interesting session, both from Krishna and from Satish. And in case there are questions in the audience,
And we'll keep that short because the Federal Minister of Information, Mr. Qamar Zaman Kaira, is on his way, and as soon as he comes in, we'll have to cut off the questions.
We've got ushers in the audience, and Mr. Anurag Batra, Chairman, Exchange for Media, would like to ask a question. Let this ball set rolling.
The next one will be Waqar Azimi.
Krishna referred to the Punjabi name a lot. Punjabi from Delhi. I don't need a mic, but since you gave me one. This is a question that goes in my mind, and I asked that to Harun Saab, and then to Krishna, and to Satish and Sarmal Bhai. Mr. Jha talked about the fact that we don't have to be bound by our nationality, because when it comes to reporting on foreign affairs and defense, that day government's stance really determines what you're reporting. On foreign affairs, defense, security, you tend to take a nationalistic view rather than a more honest view. What's your viewpoint? Is that a right thing to do? It's a wrong thing to do? Or if you went to a business school, you can say it depends. But,
Ji, Hamid, you want to take that?
Sure. My comment would be that I think the circumstances in which our security reportage grew are somewhat different from India's. Given what happened in Afghanistan in the 1980s, I think that we were faced with a decision that security issues and reporting them are so central to any transparent freedom of expression and any attempt to curtail freedom of expression and martial law, that we can't leave the issues untouched, which perhaps our friends across the border could afford to be a little more nationalistic about, if only because that's what the climate of a country allows. If we had excluded our governments from scrutiny in the harshest sense on the security issues, there would have been very little to report about at the end of it. I think it's different historical circumstances. Had our friends across the border in India, the journalists there, been in the same situation, they too would have reported security issues in that way. But security issues, I don't think, were the central agenda of India's development in that period, and they were the central agenda of ours. Hence the difference.
Ji, Waqar Azimi sahab, ye mic idhar le aye, please. Theek hai, you've got one. Okay. Go ahead.
आप दूसरा माइक प्लीज दे दें. माइक नहीं चल रहा मेरे ख्याल.
Thank you very much. My name is Waqar Yusuf Azimi. I am from Rohani Digest, Karachi. सतीश साहब से और प्रसाद साहब से आप सबसे पहले तो आपको दोबारा वेलकम. और कल आपसे बात भी हुई थी शाम को, तो आपसे पूछा था कि आपको पाकिस्तान कैसा लगा, तो आपने कहा कि पाकिस्तानी बहुत अच्छे लगे. तो उम्मीद है कि हमारे दोनों मुल्कों के दरमियान, पाकिस्तान और इंडिया के दरमियान जो दूरियां पाई जाती हैं, जो बाज़ औक़ात एक हेट्रेड की सतह को भी छूने लगती हैं, उसके बारे में क्या, एक सवाल ये है मेरा कि क्या दोनों मुल्कों का मीडिया उन नफ़रतों को और दूरियों को फैलाने का काम नहीं करता रहा, और क्या अब भी हम नहीं कर रहे, और क्या इसके लिए हमें एक बहुत बड़े डिसीजन लेने की मीडिया के लोगों को ज़रूरत नहीं है, दोनों साइड के, हमारे भी और आपके भी.
जी.
और सरमत साहब से ये है कि क्या APNS और इंडियन न्यूज़पेपर सोसाइटी मिल के कोई एक ऐसा हम कोई फॉर्म करें, ऐसा कोई फोरम हो जो साल में कम से कम एक मरतबा APNS और INS की.
ये आवाज चली गई जरा, ये माइक दे दें दूसरा.
APNS और INS, इंडियन न्यूज़पेपर सोसाइटी और APNS कोई ऐसा एक फोरम बनाए, और जो हम रेगुलर बेसिस पे हम मिलें, कभी कराची में, कभी लाहौर में, कभी इस्लामाबाद में, कभी मैसूर में, कभी हैदराबाद दक्कन में, कभी दिल्ली में. इस तरह की सर आपसे रिक्वेस्ट है कि कुछ प्रोसीड हो.
पहले प्रसाद साहब आप इस पे कमेंट करेंगे.
Thank you so much. I'll make a very small point which I also forgot.
Welcome to the
Let me welcome the Federal Minister for Information and Broadcasting, Mr. Qamar Zaman Kaira.
It's a hot seat.